So the Chinese telecoms giant is safe enough to be given a role in the new 5G network, but not safe enough to be allowed near sensitive locations such as nuclear sites and military bases. The announcement of Huawei's continued role in 5G was made after a meeting with cabinet ministers and security chiefs. So will there be a diplomatic clash with the United States? And could Tory MPs rebel over the matter? Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster now. Gary.
You'll remember one of the slogans that Boris Johnson repeated a lot in that election in December was full fibre broadband. He wanted faster connectivity, which he thought would contribute to economic growth, which would allow him the money he wanted to spend on certain goodies. Well, if he pulled Huawei completely out of the equation on 5G, they're so embedded in there, it would have quite serious implications for that entire programme. Costs, delays, the restrictions he's decided to go with on their involvement, that probably brings some significant cost and a little bit of delay, but nothing like what a complete ban would bring. So that leaves him dealing with the United States. We heard blood-curdling language from some supporters of Donald Trump today who, along with the president himself, have been saying that there should be no involvement of Huawei whatsoever in 5G in this country. We haven't actually heard from Donald Trump himself yet, but bated breath, we might yet. And as you said, Tory MPs, some of them, not all of them, but some of them political bedfellows from the Brexit crisis with alongside Boris Johnson back then, have been raising their voices with their concerns about Huawei having anything to do with 5G, or at the very least they want to see a pathway for it to be removed completely. They're not confident they've seen that. He has a massive majority, of course, but he needs to pass a law to get this restriction on the market into statute. And right now, you have to say, amazingly with that whopping majority, a few of his parliamentary number crunchers are a bit edgy. The United States said Britain shouldn't let Huawei anywhere near its 5G network, but it's already well embedded. We've gone too deep to turn back, one Whitehall source said, and they're too good. The National Security Council agreed to let Huawei be part of the UK's 5G development, but reined it in at 35% market share.
Do you think Huawei should be allowed to build our 5G network, Mr. Wallace?
At a meeting of the National Security Council this morning, critics like the Defence Secretary signed up to the policy.
Do you think it's dangerous to let Huawei build our 5G network, Mr. Wallace?
The government will come to the right decision collectively on what's right for the country.
In the Commons, for the first time since the election, the people who used to cause trouble alongside Boris Johnson were causing trouble for him.
And say, yes, I do think Huawei should be banned from our networks. It was founded by a member of the PLA. Even if it were not an arm of the Chinese government, the 2017 law requires it to take instruction from the Chinese intelligence agency.
Does he now believe that China is a threat to us in cybersecurity? And will he guarantee that as he takes on those threats to us, does he think that he will now drive Huawei out of our future systems progressively as quickly as he can?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend.
Ian Duncan Smith heckled his old Brexit ally, the Foreign Secretary. Critics of the decision worry that a company that can take orders from the Chinese government could construct backdoors into 5G technology, which could disrupt or crash systems. 5G means faster downloads on equipment like phones or computers. It speeds up response time and reliability. You can get more storage capacity and access it quicker. But 5G also gives the scope for much more real-time data exchanges between, say, driverless cars, fridges monitoring their contents, and smart factories that could start running themselves. The government's decided to restrict Huawei from sensitive parts of the 5G network and from sensitive areas like nuclear weapons or energy sites. Restricting market share means some companies already exceeding that with their Huawei equipment will have to strip it out if they want to buy newer kit.
Having to rip out Huawei entirely would cost them hundreds of millions of pounds. So any change will involve some kind of financial impact for them. We did some research which looked at a 50% restriction of Huawei across Britain, and we found that probably would result in something like an 18-month delay to the launch of 5G and as much as £4.5 billion hit to economic development as a result.
We'll work with other vendors in the UK to make sure there's diversity in the market. and we're happy with the business that we've been given.
Are you happy about the fact you work for a company that makes the British state so nervous?
Well, I'm pleased today because the UK government has accepted us into the UK network.
And hemmed you in and limited you, banned you from core networks, banned you from sensitive areas, continuing the need to examine all your equipment for security reasons.
So there are a number of mitigations in place, and we're comfortable with those. We've been working with the UK government for 15 years now.
Allies of President Trump attacked the decision. Congresswoman Liz Cheney, daughter of the former Vice President, said by allowing Huawei into the UK 5G network, Boris Johnson has chosen the surveillance state over the special relationship. Senator Mitt Romney, former Republican presidential candidate, said by prioritising costs, the UK is sacrificing national security and inviting the Chinese Communist Party surveillance state in. Sputnik. Some argue the US is suffering a Sputnik moment, an echo of 1957, when the United States discovered the communist Soviet Union was beating it in the space race.
An enemy of ours has outdistanced us.
Russia's getting into space really bothers me.
There are echoes of that fear today as the United States falls behind China's lead in cyberspace. Some in Whitehall think it's that worry, not hard evidence of China's dark intent, that is driving the US. They doubt United States threats to restrict intelligence sharing with the UK.
I don't think that the voices that we've heard in the British debate from Washington represent the American intelligence community. I think they are mostly political people around the administration, the White House. That relationship between the two intelligence communities is so deep and so trusting, so important to both sides. I don't think that that is going to be threatened.
GCHQ have categorically confirmed that how we construct our 5G and full fibre public telecoms network has nothing to do with how we share classified data. And the UK's technical security experts have agreed that the new controls on high-risk vendors are completely consistent with the UK's security needs.
The government here says the answer is to build up Western rivals to Huawei, something Boris Johnson told President Trump by phone this afternoon. But catching up China on 5G is not going to be easy or cheap.
Well, joining me now from the House of Commons is the Labour MP, Kevin Jones, who has served on the Intelligence and Security Committee and is hoping to be reappointed to that, and Tom Tugendhat, who was chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and is also hoping to be re-elected to that. Tom Tugendhat, when the security services and former national security advisors are sure that this is all fine, why are you so sure that it's a mistake?
Well, I think there's a real problem with Huawei that is nothing to do with the United States or nothing to do with Australia, but is everything to do with the way this Chinese company is structured. And indeed, the government itself recognises that. After all, that's why the government described it as a high-risk vendor. There's no reason to describe it as a high-risk vendor if you don't think it is one. But it fails all 8 tests that the government set out, and so the government clearly is concerned, and that's why I support very much the government's efforts that it's made in order to identify high-risk vendors in recent months. But I'm very, very keen that the plan outlined today is not a target of 35%, but merely a waypoint of 35% on the way to a target of 0.
Kevin Jones, if there is a high risk from Huawei, limiting it to 35% is not really going to eliminate that risk, is it?
Well, no, because if you look at the evidence which is produced by GCHQ and was provided to the Intelligence Security Committee, what risk there is can be mitigated. The nonsense that's been talking about, for example, that it will be able to get involved in the 5 Eyes secure networks is just rubbish. What we need to do here is actually look at the facts. And the facts is that security services have done a very detailed and I think intensive investigation into this. And I think the assurance they've given are robust.
Tom Tugendhat?
Well, I'm sure Kevin is absolutely right that the ability to get into our secure communications systems is 0. But that isn't the point for this system. This system is based on, the 5G system, forgive me, is based on the idea that many different items will communicate together, creating much more data than is available now, from autonomous vehicles to crikey, any number of different items that sort of communicate together through the 5G network. And so the key is here to look at the reality that the core and edge distinction are being eroded. And that's why I'm absolutely adamant that the government, as it has announced it so far, is a welcome progress on the existing situation, but I'm very keen to see this going to zero, not just to 35%.
But what are you afraid that China would do?
Well, we've already seen what China has done. It's not a question of being afraid of what it might do, it's what it has done. If you look at, for example, the African Union in Ethiopia that has been sending packets of data to Shenzhen between midnight and 2 in the morning from Huawei systems. The same in Uganda. We've got reports of Hikvision using Huawei technology sending information from Tanzania. And we know that Hikvision and Huawei are both integral to the police state that is Xinjiang, where some million or so Uyghur Muslims are already in detention. So we know that Huawei is part of the security state in China, and we know that this is causing concern even, for example, to the communist Vietnamese. So although I am absolutely confident that GCHQ are right, that they can mitigate the challenges immediately, I think it's very interesting that it was the MI5 chief and not SIX or GCHQ who came out to argue that all this was fine.
Kevin Jones, is it that you believe that the opposition to Huawei is really more to do with an American trade war, of which Britain is not part?
No, I think there's two issues. I think the examples that Tom gave, you're not comparing like with like. In the UK, it's not just security services that could intercept any intercepts, but also the vendors, the BTs, the Vodafones of this world as well. But the real, I think, stark contrast here is that we have a system which has been, it was described this afternoon as a market failure. It's not. It's actually a country which has made an aggressive attempt to dominate this technology. And where we're lacking in the West, and certainly in this country, is the technology and investment that's needed in this area of technology. And
so that is market failure?
Well, it's not market failure. It's that we've actually, I think, turned a blind eye to the fact that the Chinese have invested billions of dollars in research and development and actually acquired technologies from the West. And what I asked this afternoon was what percentage of monies the government were going to put into R&D, and also are they going to stop, for example, Chinese companies acquiring UK-based technologies? Because if they don't do those two things, the idea of actually providing a new system is not going to happen.
Tom Tugendhat, a lot of your colleagues are very concerned about this. I mean, do you think the legislation that needs to be put through could be amended?
Well, look, I think Kevin's absolutely right that the investment that needs to go into the 5G technology, this has been a failure of regulation, a failure of investment since 2003 and perhaps even longer. So this is not a partisan issue, and indeed, like in the United States, this is not a partisan issue. What we need to do is we need to secure our own crown jewels in technology here. We need to make sure we work with our Five Eyes partners to create systems that actually really do work for all of us. And we need to make sure that we get those high-risk vendors out of our system as quickly as possible. Now, I don't know.
So do you think you could change the decision? I mean, this isn't the end of it.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what the bill is that comes forward. The Foreign Secretary announced that there was a bill coming forward very soon, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. I'm very much looking forward to working with the government, who has made real progress here on the existing situation. I mean, let's recognise progress where it is, and that's what this government has done. But I think there's a lot further to go, because the reality is if you have high-risk vendors, as the government calls them, in your system, then you've really got to be looking at ways to get them out.